Good afternoon. We are getting into the call now, and we will give a few moments before everyone is settled down, and we will get started. All right. Well, good afternoon again, and welcome to the Fall 2020 CEO panel presented by the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business at Marshall University. I'm Avi Mukherjee, Dean of the Lewis College of Business. Thank you, speakers and panelists, students, alumni, faculty, staff, community members, business leaders, government officials, university administrators, and board members for joining us on this webinar today. The Lewis College of Business, celebrating its 50th anniversary, offers contemporary, cutting-edge, and applied business education and research while being rooted in the region's economic and business development. Reimagined by a transformational gift by Brad and Elise Smith in 2018, the Brad D. Smith Schools of Business have identified experiential learning as the DNA of our academic programs in business. The Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series was started in 2018 as the highest profile community event of the Brad D. Smith Schools of Business, offering a rich and vibrant experience to our students and various other stakeholders as they learn from renowned C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and industry leaders about business successes, effective leadership, and the future of work. As a part of this series, the CEO panel, put together by Brad Smith and his team at Intuit, brings globally recognized top-tier CEOs to provide insightful perspectives through dynamic discussions covering a broad range of topics that influence the world of business and draw powerful lessons from the boardroom to the classroom. You might remember our highly successful first CEO panel held on February 19 at the historic and majestic Keith Albee Performing Arts Theater in Huntington. Today, we are hosting the second CEO panel in this series, where Brad Smith will engage in a fireside chat with the executive chairman and former CEO of LinkedIn. The theme of the panel discussion is leadership and teamwork. Talent is dispersed equally, but opportunity is not. Rapid technological, environmental, and societal shifts are driving the lack of economic opportunity in communities around the globe. The current health and economic crisis are speeding up these shifts even more. In this fireside chat, Marshall students and local community leaders will hear from two leaders in technology to discuss the skills and mindsets needed to lead and succeed in today's landscape. The goal of this fireside chat is to provide insight and inspiration for the audience and further encourage them to apply their talent and energy to pursue their passion and create opportunities for themselves and their communities. There will be a question and answer period at the end, coordinated by Dr. Nancy Langton, our Associate Dean for Accreditation and Strategic Initiatives. Together, communities, corporations, and academia can shape the world for future generations to thrive. Thank you for supporting the Distinguished Speaker Series at Marshall University as we strive to create impact, innovation, and engagement for business and business education in our mountain state. It is now my honor to introduce the President of Marshall University, Dr. Jerome Gilbert.
Thank you, Avi. I want to welcome everyone to this virtual meeting. And it's my pleasure today to introduce my friend Brad Smith, one of Marshall's most outstanding graduates. And let me start by saying what I admire most about Brad Smith is that with a little help from Marshall University, he is a self-made man. Brad was born in Huntington, West Virginia, and raised in Canova, West Virginia, which is about 8 miles west of Huntington on the border with Kentucky. His parents, his late father and his mother, who still lives in Canova, laid a strong foundation of traditional West Virginia values, which have stayed with Brad to the current day. In fact, on numerous occasions, he has attributed his rather humble beginnings as key to his success. He learned the value of hard work, integrity, humility, and teamwork right there in Canova, West Virginia. Brad Smith graduated from Marshall University in 1986 with a Bachelor of Business Administration degree with an emphasis in marketing. His first job was a senior account manager with Pepsi in Grand Rapids, where at night he attended classes and earned a master's in management from Aquinas College. He had a meteoric rise through the business ranks with jobs at 7-Up, Advo, ADP, and then to Intuit in 2003. At Intuit, with positions as vice president, senior vice president, and general manager of 2 different groups. He then went to president and CEO of Intuit in 2008. He later became chairman of the board of directors in 2016. Brad's business savvy is legend. He transformed both Intuit's products and its work environment. He was named among the top CEOs in America by Fortune magazine and weighed in at an impressive position at number 6. Not bad for a kid from Canova, West Virginia. Brad is a man whose many experiences have shaped who he is. He's always reminded me not to mistake kindness for weakness. Brad is strong and kind. I attribute the influence of his wife, Elise, and his daughters, Peyton and Devin, in helping him develop a sensitive and kind nature, which has given him an edge in motivating his employees and understanding people, both critical for success in business. Brad is not only kind, but he is also generous. Brad has been generous to his home state of West Virginia and to Marshall University. Just recently, in partnership with his wife, Elise, Brad established the Wing to Wing Foundation. The goal of Wing to Wing is to provide small communities like those in West Virginia with entrepreneurial resources and funding that provide a foundation for aspiring business leaders. And for Marshall, as you heard, Brad and Elise made one of the largest gifts in the history of our university in giving $25 million for the College of Business. We now have the Brad D. Smith Business Incubator and the Brad D. Smith Undergraduate School of Business and the Brad D. Smith School of Graduate Business. And next year, we will break ground on a state-of-the-art building on 4th Avenue in Huntington, the Brad D. Smith Center for Business and Innovation, the future home of Marshall's Lewis College of Business. We are very proud of Brad, and we're very proud of his inspiration to all of us. I will now turn it over to my colleague and my friend, Brad D. Smith. Brad.
Thank you, President Gilbert, for that warm, for that generous introduction, for your friendship. And as you and I have often spoke, I would have been happy with Brad from Canova, but your kind words mean a lot to me. Hello, Herd Nation. Greetings, West Virginia. And a big shout out to all of you who are joining us from elsewhere around the country and around the globe. It is a real honor to have the opportunity to speak with you today and to facilitate the second CEO panel in Marshall University's Distinguished Speaker Series. As Dean Avi described, this series is designed to bring the most forward-thinking leaders from the most innovative companies to share their insights with you and to engage directly and to hear what's on your mind. It's hard to believe it was just 8 short months ago that we hosted the first CEO panel with Dan Schulman, the CEO of PayPal, and Shantanu Narayan, the chairman and CEO of Adobe, at the historic Keith Albee Theater in downtown Huntington, West Virginia. And so much has happened in the last 8 months. We've endured natural disasters, from fires in Australia to the west coast of the United States, floods in Indonesia, earthquakes in Puerto Rico and Turkey. We've had volcanoes in Mexico, in Philippines and Japan. There's been a locust infestation and, of course, the great pandemic, COVID-19. More than 8 million reported cases, more than 200,000 deaths in the United States. There have been lost jobs, economic disruption, social distancing, canceled events. And when you go through that and you look at it, it's been both a great accelerator for some and a great disruptor for others, disproportionately affecting certain demographic groups and certain geographic regions. When I go through that list, it can sound apocalyptic, but I'm optimistic. because I believe the strongest steel is forged in the hottest flames. And I believe that this opportunity is for us to transform this existing challenging reality into an amazing and exciting new chapter for us as individuals, for the university and the state, and for society as a whole. But to do that, we have to embrace the old adage that bad times, when followed by good, deep reflection, can lead to the greatest opportunities. And that's what today's conversation is designed to do. I have the privilege of introducing to you one of the most foremost innovative thinkers in business and philanthropy, Jeff Weiner. Jeff is currently the executive chairman of LinkedIn, where he continues to support the company's vision of creating economic opportunity to every individual in the global workforce. In doing so, he coaches and mentors the senior team, he advises on their strategic initiatives, and he continues to be a spokesperson for the company. Jeff is an amazing leader, and beyond LinkedIn, he is also an active investor. He coaches entrepreneurs, and he's a philanthropist with a particular focus on making sure that compassion is both taught and practiced in the classroom of every primary school in the United States. Jeff is also a world-class operator, and everyone in the Valley has learned from him. He led LinkedIn as the CEO for 11 years before stepping down in June. When he took over the company, there were 338 employees. When he exited, they had grown to more than 16,000. He took the active member base from 33 million when he started to 690 million when he stepped down, growing revenues from 78 million to 7.9 billion. Before LinkedIn, Jeff was an entrepreneur in residence in two of the most leading venture capital firms in the Silicon Valley, Accel Partners and Greylock Partners. He was an executive vice president at Yahoo, and he began his career at Warner Brothers, where he helped get that company into the online world when the internet was really starting to emerge. Jeff serves on several boards, one being my company, Intuit, in addition to Donors Choose and Everfi. He's also on the board of trustees of the Paley Center for Media, and he hails from Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania with a bachelor's in economics. And while all of those things are worthy of being in the Hall of Fame, candidly, I think what distinguishes Jeff from almost everyone else I know is his compassionate friendship and his leadership. He is a world-class human being. So without further ado, please join me in extending a warm and virtual welcome to my dear friend, Jeff Weiner.
Thank you, Brad. It's fantastic to be here with you. And I'm so privileged to have this opportunity to meet with such an amazing group of people.
Well, Jeff, you and I have been friends for a lot of years, and you've heard me talk a lot about West Virginia and about Marshall, and you've even helped me architect some of the things that we're now bringing to life. So this audience has been waiting for you for some time, and they should know they've been on your mind from some time. And if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is, obviously, I went through many of your professional accomplishments, and these things are written about everywhere. If you look on YouTube, you read LinkedIn articles, you look at Fortune magazine, you're all over in terms of the things you've accomplished. But sometimes people really want to know who you are as a person. So I'd like to begin by asking you, if you reflect back on your life and think about those formative moments that helped shape your moral compass, and that in turn defines how you show up as a person, as a leader, could you just kind of unpack a few of those moments and what those lessons were that helped shape who you are?
Yes. By the way, this is the first time I've been interviewed by a guy who has the building named after him and the school named after him. So this is kind of next level kind of stuff. So I'll do my best, Brad, but you set an extraordinarily high bar. So I guess some of the most impactful things that happened to me along the way that kind of shape who I am in your parlance moral compass. I guess the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question would be the way in which my parents instilled in me certain values and just, Brad, the importance of values, period. It was a theme and a concept that I remember talking to them about at a very, very young age, and it was consistent throughout. So it's not just the idea that values matter, that first principles matter, that virtues matter, but the consistency with which they prioritized it, and they talked about it, and they reinforced it, and they lived it, and they taught it. a few of those values that come to mind, the importance of being honest, and really being authentic, trusting my gut, trusting my instinct was something that I remember my dad reinforcing just very consistently over the years. Maybe less of a value, but certainly something that shaped me in a material way was this idea that I could do anything I set my mind to. And I think in a sense, implicit in that, the importance of perseverance and resilience. So those would be some of the things that I learned growing up that I think shaped who I am. It's interesting, Brad. I think oftentimes when we talk about moral compass, when we talk about first principles, we start at childhood. But for me, some of the most profound things that I learned happened much later in life. Certainly those things that would influence my approach to leadership. And as you well know, I read a book when I was about 30 years old called The Art of Happiness. And it was in that book that I was introduced to the classical definition of compassion, the difference between compassion and empathy, and what it meant to treat other people with compassion. And I would argue that perhaps above all else was the single most defining moment in terms of shaping my approach to leadership.
Jeff, I'd like to pick up on that theme. First of all, I want to say I've had the chance to meet your mother and father and to see you interact and to see the pride you have for them and, quite frankly, the pride and the love they have for you. And so it's wonderful to see that continuous learning journey at this point in time continue to go on. But I'd like to ask you if you would unpack what you learned as you read that book, the difference between compassion and empathy, because I think this is a critical point that sometimes people merge those two concepts.
Yeah, especially in Western society, we have a tendency to use those two words synonymously. And there's a fundamental difference between them. So empathy is feeling what another living thing feels. Compassion is putting yourself in the shoes of another person, seeing the world through their lens or perspective for the sake, classically defined, of alleviating their suffering. Empathy is a means towards that compassionate. And when you are feeling what someone else is feeling, you're in a better position to help them. Put another way, compassion is empathy plus action. And it's this actionable component that is the fundamental difference. The Dalai Lama in this book, The Art of Happiness, illustrated it in a really, for me, invaluable way. He said, if you were walking along a mountainous trail, you came upon someone who was being crushed with a boulder on their chest. The empathetic response would be to feel the same sense of suffocation, which in turn would render you helpless. You wouldn't be able to do anything. You can't breathe. The compassionate response is to recognize that individual is suffering, perhaps drawing upon an experience you had where you couldn't breathe, and feeling that viscera, that sense of urgency, and then most importantly, doing everything within your power to alleviate that individual suffering by removing the boulder from their chest. So that was beyond an eye-opener, and to this day, for folks that haven't heard me talk about the subject, I still have that book on my nightstand. It's been there for 20 years, literally, no exaggeration. I still have the book in a very visible place.
And Jeff, you just illustrated one of the things I was going to ask you about, so I'll go ahead and do a follow-up question. You have developed a reputation of being able to take a very complex or obtuse concept and turn it into a very actionable and understandable framework. And you just did that for us with compassion. If I asked you to do the same thing with the word leadership, what does leadership mean to you and what are its component parts? How would you break that down similarly to what you just did with compassion?
Yeah, and for those in the audience that don't know, Brad, thank you for that compliment, but right back at you. Having the privilege of being on Brad's board for many years, watching him as a CEO, you all should know I've never met anyone better at distilling complexity into a simple framework and using that framework to inspire and rally others to take on pretty significant challenges. So we are in the presence of someone that does it extraordinarily well. And I've had the opportunity to learn from Brad firsthand. So I guess I would answer the question in two ways, Brad. One is a literal definition, at least my own. The other would be the framework. The definition for me of leadership is the ability to inspire others to achieve shared objectives. And for me, by far the most important word there is inspire. To me, that's what leadership is all about. And it's what separates leaders from managers. Managers tell people what to do. Leaders inspire them to do it. And I believe inspiration emanates from three dynamics. The first is the clarity of one's vision. The second is the courage of your conviction. And the third is your ability to effectively communicate both of those things, either in words or in deed, or ideally both. So that's kind of the way I define or think about leadership. In terms of a framework, it's taken years to cultivate, but whereas I started with this very focused definition on inspiration, over time that evolved to really three pillars, of which inspiration is one. The first is awareness, the ability to be self-aware, aware of your team, the company, and the broader macro environment, and to course correct as a result of all the input coming at you. The second is synthesis. And if you're highly aware, you're going to be inundated with the input, data, information, knowledge, viscera, and the ability to separate signal from noise, connect the dots, craft a narrative, craft a plan, communicate that plan. And that leads to the third pillar, which is inspiration, and the ability to communicate that in a way that inspires others and brings them along on the same journey.
Wow. I would say to you, you should write that down, codify it, and teach it, but I know you're doing exactly that, and you've inspired me to do the same. So thank you for sharing that. And I'd like to weave the two concepts together now, Jeff, this notion of compassion and this notion of leadership. And I know that you are an advocate for compassionate leadership, and I would love you to just unpack why that is important as an ethos and how you see that making its way into an organization or a culture.
Yeah. So I think it's important for at least three reasons. The first is that when we invest in the success of others, we invest in our own success. And I'm not sure that's always top of mind when people think of compassion. But when you're putting yourself in the shoes of other people, when you're showing up for them, when you have their back, when you're alleviating their suffering or trying to help them accomplish a goal, especially in this modern era where we are all so connected, when you're helping others, you're helping yourself. So that's one. Two, I believe that the long-term value of any organization is in part created by the speed and quality of its decision-making. I think better decisions are made faster when leadership teams have shorthand. I think shorthand emanates from trust, and I think trust can be derived through compassion and being there for one another consistently over time. And then the third benefit of compassion, certainly in the workplace, is this ability to put yourself in the shoes of people that you wouldn't normally be thinking about when making certain kinds of decisions, certain segments of your customer base, by way of example, who may not benefit from the products or services that you are launching, that you are distributing in a way that you've intended. And those unintended consequences of your actions, despite the best of intentions, can sometimes be avoided by asking difficult questions preemptively. And you can do that increasingly by being compassionate and putting yourself in the shoes of those people other than yourself, other than those people that you're working with. And the more we can do that, the more I think we can avoid these unintended consequences.
Wow, that really does bring it to life. And I'd love to pull on that thread a little bit and take the compassion aspect and do the inverse of what you did when I asked you about the moral compass. You said, yes, some of those things happen in childhood and some things happen later. Now you've helped me understand how compassion shows up later in a leadership role, but I'd like to take it back to the classroom, which is one of your goals. Why do you think it's important to teach compassion in our elementary schools and primary schools, and how do you see that happening?
Well, for starters, it occurred to me after reading the book years later, I would question whether or not compassion could be taught. Was it something that certain people had innately in them, this ability, or was it something that could be learned? And I ended up, very fortunately for me, stumbling across a PBS documentary called A Class Divided, which was about this brilliant third grade teacher in Iowa. Shortly after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. She was white, she had an all-white class, and she decided that she had to do something about it. And she ended up separating her class shortly after the assassination by virtue of the color of the eyes of the students. So one half of the class dark-eyed, the other half of the class light-eyed. And on the first day of this experiment that she conducted, this exercise, she told the light-eyed kids they were better in every way. And so they were celebratory and feeling themselves. And then these poor dark-eyed kids were subjugated and felt horribly about themselves. But the real magic came the next day when she brought them into the class and said she had made a horrible mistake, that it was the dark-eyed kids that were superior in every way. And wasn't that just plainly obvious to everyone in the classroom? And so, of course, now the light-eyed kids felt horrible and the dark-eyed kids were celebratory. But you could see in this documentary that was filmed years later that the dark-eyed kids had a sense of compassion. They had been in that position. More importantly, they tracked these students, and a couple of decades later, they brought them all back to talk about their experience. And essentially, to a person, they were members of the civil rights movement. And they traced that back to that experience over a 24-hour period in third grade.
Wow.
So for me, watching that, it occurred to me, Brad, that it can be taught. It can be taught, and not only can it be taught, it needs to be taught. And certainly in America, we put so much emphasis on skills like reading, writing, math, and they're obviously critical. But I'm not sure I could think of anything more important than teaching compassion. And in a way, it's arguably the platform upon which all of these other skills should be taught, especially today, when tribalism, when this idea that it's us against them, when people are leveraging social media to immerse themselves in their own worldviews and shut out people with diverse opinions and perspectives. And you very eloquently pointed out so many of the challenges we face today. We need to be coming together as a global society to solve the many problems that you articulated, not tearing each other down. And the way we do that is by understanding compassion, the meaning of compassion, what it means to practice compassion, and then doing it. And so I was able to connect and partner with an ed tech company called Everfi, fantastic company. And we co-developed a curriculum for teaching compassion in elementary school. And our mission is to ensure that compassion is taught in every primary school in the country, and to ensure that kids not only understand it, but can practice it. And it's wonderful to see the progress we've made after 2 school years. We've had 21,000 primary schools sign up.
Wow. Well, you and I have to talk about how we bring that curriculum and that opportunity into the West Virginia primary schools. But I love this, Jeff. Already, we're a handful of minutes in, and you've shared a book that's inspired you. You've shared a documentary that's inspired you. Obviously, a company you're partnering with. And this is why I love to work with you, because I learn something every single time. And I want to continue to pull on that thread, because when you were unpacking leadership, you talked about the importance of trust and cultivating trust, and how that becomes the lubricant for everything else that happens in business. And recently, we invited you to come and speak at our Intuit Leadership Conference, and you unpack some very pragmatic approaches, some tips and techniques you apply in staff meetings and every day. Could you share for the audience how you help cultivate and foster trust in an organization, and some of the very actionable ways you can do that?
Yeah, well, I would start with the way I think about trust and define trust, which I learned from a very wise friend years ago. And trust is consistency over time, a simple formula for a very, very complex human dynamic. Trust is consistency over time, and there is no substitute for any aspect of that. My telling you or anyone to trust me when I have first met you is not going to lead to trust. And trying to generate and develop meaningful, lasting trust in a very short period of time is going to be very challenging. So consistency over time, that becomes foundational to the whole practice of cultivating trust. I think in terms of some of the things that we did at LinkedIn and the company continues to do, I think one may be a little counterintuitive to folks. And Brad, if I don't bring up the things you have in mind, by all means, please jar my memory. But one thing we did is at staff meetings, we would kick off staff meeting by sharing both a personal win and kudos to another member of the team. Now, for those of you that have been in the workplace and attended either a staff meeting that you led or that was being led by your manager, typically staff meetings just jump right into the problems. And everyone starts saying, what about this and what about that? And I got a complaint and we're underperforming here. And I learned years ago from a member of my team that it's best to create a more positive energy to get the meeting started. And one of the ways to do that is to start with wins. And the personal win I have found, when done consistently over time, there is perhaps no better way to truly get to know your colleagues than sharing a very simple personal win at the beginning of staff meetings. And, Brad mentioned at the onset of today's call, I was the CEO for over 11 years. If you really want to get to know someone, you meet weekly with them and you kick off that meeting by sharing something that you're excited about at home or something going on outside of work. And the way in which you get to know one another and the way in which you show up as your authentic self, it's incredibly powerful dynamic in terms of building trust. And then it's not just about the personal win. We used to do professional wins, and people originally would talk about the things they're most proud of, the things they accomplished or their team accomplished. And what we did over time, we evolved that to be kudos, to actually extend appreciation to another member of the team, to shine a light on what they're doing and what their teams are doing, and to express gratitude. And so these are a couple of things that we did. They may sound like lightweight tools, but I can't tell you how powerful they can be when consistently repeated week after week, and just being there for one another, getting to know one another. I think cultivating authenticity and making sure that people can be their true selves, that they don't have to cover who they are, that they can feel a sense of belonging amongst others, and really investing not just in diversity, not just in an inclusion, but in creating an environment where people feel like they belong. I think these are all fundamental to cultivating trust.
Jeff, that was exactly what I was hoping you would share. That resonated throughout the company. It's a very actionable way of starting a meeting. And quite frankly, as we reflected on it, we said, why have we not been doing that? And as you and I chatted, and you know this well being on our board, we worked with General Stanley McChrystal, who led the Joint Special Operations Command. So the combination of the Army Rangers, the Delta Force, the Navy SEALs, plus some of the federal government entities like the State Department and CIA. And one of the things he said is, consistency over time, as Jeff just described, is how you build trust, but sometimes you have to act when you haven't had the opportunity to do that. And he gave us 2 tips. He said the first is everyone needs to assume competence in your peers. So assume they know how to do their job, and they will do their job. And then the second is you need to role model benevolence yourself. In other words, in service to others. So you feed them before you feed yourself. And that, he said, is a good way to get the foundation in place for building that consistency over time.
Brad, this point you raise about assuming benevolence, the way I would have characterized that and the way we did was giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. And it ties back to another theme that we covered on today's call, which is compassion. And one of the reasons compassion becomes so important, particularly in a work environment and particularly in settings or meetings where there is friction, is because as soon as friction is generated, if there is a meaningful disagreement, if someone does something to undermine the other person, especially in a group of other people, the typical knee-jerk reaction is to assume nefarious intention. We all do it. We all do it. We're all human, and we all do it, especially when we become triggered. And God knows there's plenty of ways for us all to be triggered if we're being honest. And in those moments, especially when we become emotional, if we can become spectators to our own thoughts, if we can step outside of our initial response, if we can put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, not assume nefarious intention is why they've gotten angry or why they're irritated, but to spend a moment and try to understand where they're coming from and what role you played in that. And then to de-escalate that tension or friction, it becomes invaluable in building trust.
Yes.
Because you're showing up for the other person.
Yes.
And imagine the delight of that individual when you actually stop in the middle of this argument and say, hang on, time out. I'm sorry if I said something that upset you. That certainly was not my intention. But if I could better understand why it is that you're upset, I think we could get back on track because we're at this meeting for a shared objective. And then imagine how that compounds outside of the meeting. Now, normally, and everyone on this call today has been in a bad meeting or been in a meeting where there's friction or tension. And if it's not resolved, you leave the meeting, then what do? You find like minds, you find people on your team and you say, can you believe such and such did that and how they were going on and you kind of commiserate and they're doing the same thing. And that increases the tension and that compounds throughout an organization. But imagine the flip side of that when you leave the meeting and say, I can't believe it. The other person was actually looking out for me. That's, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel supported. I feel like we're a part of the same team. Now imagine how that compounds throughout a multi-thousand person organization. And you can start to get a sense for how value can be created through these principles.
I love that, Jeff. And I love how you weave that together in terms of the flip side of what it would be like if you role modeled these kinds of behaviors. I just finished a book called Washington's Farewell Address, which was amazing. And one of the things in the book that Washington espoused as the founding father and obviously our first president was he had a notion of speak without being offensive, listen without being defensive, and preserve the relationships around you, leaving even your adversary with their dignity. And I thought it was an incredible way to articulate this notion of how to disagree without being disagreeable, and sort of what the pillars for that kind of conversation is, which takes me to this next question for you. You called on this topic a few moments ago when you talked about the importance of a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. Can you talk about why that is so important to create that gestalt that you've been walking us through, this compassionate leadership, this team that's in service to each other? And how do you cultivate that sort of an environment as a leader?
Yeah, so one of the reasons it's so important is because we all have a tendency to be egocentric, not to be confused with egomaniacal. Egocentric, we see the world through our own lens, through our own experiences. And we do this in large part to protect ourselves, to make better decisions. We're leveraging a lifetime of experiences to help guide us. But our experiences, each individual's experiences, are different than the other person's. And so while we instinctually act upon our own worldview, there are unintended consequences of that. And there is unconscious bias that takes place. And this unconscious bias, when it manifests itself at a company, for example, in the products and services that you're offering, that the organization is offering, in the way you make decisions, in the people that you recruit, in the people that you promote, unconscious bias has a tendency to manifest itself throughout, despite the best of intentions. And we are wired to gravitate towards people that look like us, that sound like us, that agree with us. But the ideal, the optimal decision, the most valuable decision will be the decision that's made with diverse voices and perspectives around the table. And as much of a virtue as it is to be more inclusive, it's not just the right thing to do. It's the best thing for your company. It's the best thing for your team. It's the best thing for the decision to have those diverse voices included in the process. There's a lot of different ways organizations go about trying to prioritize and cultivate and invest in diversity and inclusion and belonging. And LinkedIn still has a long way to go. Despite all of the focus and energy, it can be difficult to get right. And there's a few different ways we go about this. One is in the very products and services that we offer. Brad mentioned at the onset, our vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. That's something we take seriously. But it's important that we can root out unconscious bias and the way that potentially affects our members. And one example of that would be the algorithms we use to recommend jobs or to recommend connections to our membership. And what the team did in the spirit of that vision statement was to create the every member team. And this every member team developed an experimentation framework that enables us to see the impact of every newly introduced algorithm or recommendation matching capability and see how it may be having unintended consequences on specific segments of our member population. So we can avoid these unintended consequences before they happen. So that's one example with regard to product and technology. Another is in the way we build our team and the way we recruit. And I think it's very, very important for organizations to not necessarily depend on the job descriptions that have been circulated for years, if not decades, or the practices, the universities that they recruit from, or the referrals that are being generated by a specific group of people, because all of this narrows the aperture through which you're bringing talent into your organization. And so to broaden that aperture, I think it's critical that organizations seek out non-traditional talent, people with non-traditional backgrounds, individuals who have the skills, the aptitude, the ability, but may not have the degree from a specific university, or may not have the connections to get their foot in the door of your organization. And we all miss out on this world-class talent and these people who are so capable. So we've created apprenticeship programs, by way of example, engineering apprentice programs for people who have not studied computer science, but who have some perfunctory understanding of code through a coding boot camp. We've done the same thing for recruiting. We recruit apprentice members for our recruiting team who don't have traditional recruiting backgrounds, but who come from diverse backgrounds. And that's an incredibly powerful dynamic because they can tap their networks of diverse talent once they get their foot in the door. So those would be a few different examples of how we're thinking about applying greater diversity, greater inclusion, greater belonging, not just to our team in terms of recruiting efforts, but to our products as well.
Those are wonderful examples. And Jeff, that's where you and I've spent a lot of time. As you know, that's my passion and the reason why I like to invest in Marshall University in West Virginia and the amazing talent there, because it gives us an opportunity to level the playing field of opportunity and to shine the light on the incredible talent that exists there, that many times people were always looking at the coast and saying, this is where we have to go because this is where our offices are. And I think this great pandemic and work from home and remote workforces, this is going to open up a whole new chapter for so many people and so many to contribute in ways they couldn't have done in the past. And I want to take that notion now and take compassion, the importance of trust in a team environment, and the importance of having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment, and talk about decision-making. You referenced earlier the importance of making very good quality decisions with speed. And you and I have been living this. In the amount of time we were both CEOs, they say the pace of change has accelerated 10x over the last 5 years. The velocity of change is just happening quicker. And now with this pandemic, the leaders sitting in these seats, you and I marvel at how they have to adjust and adapt on a daily or on an hourly basis. So what are the techniques or the approaches that you would suggest to leaders to make sure that their teams are making the best quality decisions at the fastest velocity possible?
Yeah, so what comes to mind immediately is focus, first and foremost. Now, some may immediately think I'm talking about the idea of focusing, and I am, but we developed an acronym around the word focus, FCS. The F is fewer things done better. The C is communicating the right information to the right people at the right time. And the S is the speed and quality of our decision-making, exactly how you frame the question. And with regard to focusing on fewer things done better, the fewer priorities that an organization or a team is pursuing, the more that organization is likely to be successful. Now, not every team or every company has the luxury of being able to focus on just one thing. And as our organizations grow, by nature, they almost become more complex. But to the extent teams can simplify and focus on fewer things done better, that enables leaders to more effectively communicate what the organization is trying to accomplish. It enables individuals on the team to more effectively internalize what the organization is trying to accomplish. It enables those individuals to, in turn, coach and communicate those ideas to other people on the team. So that focus on fewer things done better, minimizing complexity, becomes foundational to making better decisions faster. So that's one. Two, communicating the right information to the right people at the right time and doing so proactively. Defining success with key measures, defining key operating priorities, defining key strategic objectives, reinforcing them. Repetition is absolutely essential in terms of effective communication. And then not waiting for the right people to ask for the information and reacting to that, but getting the right information to those individuals as proactively as possible enables them to make better decisions faster, enables them to avoid surprises. It enables them to start seeing around corners. And then with regard to the speed and quality of decision making, I would suggest two things come to mind immediately. One is making clear how decisions are made within organizations. Oftentimes people hear about decision making and they think it's decision making. How complicated can it be? Someone's got to make a decision, or some team makes a decision. It's not that simple. Because as soon as, and Brad's laughing because he knows, as soon as you bring people into the fray, you get a lot of people feeling like, okay, I'm going to make the decision, or I'm going to be the one that heavily influences how the decision is made. And as your organization becomes larger, as teams become larger, that's more and more people in the mix. That is not how to accelerate a process. It's how to bog it down. And so defining how decisions are made, teams I've been on over the years, I like to practice something called rapid decision making. That too is an acronym. R is the person responsible for the recommendation. A is the person responsible for agreeing or disagreeing with the recommendation and escalating it to the decision maker if they disagree. The P are the people responsible for producing the results. The I are the individuals responsible for providing input into how the recommendation is made. The D is the decision maker. Two noteworthy things, and we could do a whole call on this. Two noteworthy things. Most people knee-jerk to the D as being the most important part of that process. It's not. In a well-run organization, it's the R, because the D will have been very thoughtful in terms of assigning the recommendation to an individual who they trust to do the right thing and make the right recommendation. So the R is really the hub of that wheel. The second, and arguably the most important part of that, is the A. And the A, just calling out the fact that only select people have the ability to disagree and escalate, is critical, because typically in decision-making processes, every single person who's asked for their input believes they can escalate if they disagree with where it's headed. And there's no faster way to slow down a decision-making process than that. So the second thing is an adjunct to this, and we call it 5-day alignment. And it's not to be confused with making decisions in 5 days, because some decisions just require a lot more time than that. But 5-day alignment means when that team who has their rapid roles is not all on the same page in terms of how things are going to be decided, they need to come together and within 5 days get on the same page. And whether it's 5 days or however long your team or your organization wants to define that time period and frame it, when you don't have the limit, teams will go on and on and on in their quest for consensus. And in some of the best run and most virtuous organizations, they will try to avoid upsetting other individuals. And so it can go months without resolution because people are confusing kindness with getting to the right decision.
Thank you, Jeff. Incredible. A lot in that answer. Focus, a very important aspect. Clear tools like rapid on how to make a decision and get the right inclusion, but be very clear about how the decision will get made and when it'll get made. I have one very quick question, and then we're going to open it up to take some questions from the students, professors, and business leaders. And this question is about an individual today, a student who may be graduating soon into what is currently a very volatile situation. What would be a piece of advice or a tip you would give that student to say, here's a tool, could be LinkedIn, and here's how I think you can best optimize your opportunity and probability of finding an opportunity that matches your aspiration? What would that piece of advice be?
The tool, yes, I could talk all day about LinkedIn, and we can circle back to that if you want and give some practical tips. But the tool, the advice I would give is the importance of knowing what it is you ultimately want to accomplish and taking the time to understand that. and optimizing for two things: your skill and your passion, and not one at the exclusion of the other. I cannot tell you the number of people, and these are individuals who are well down the path of their career, who wake up 5-10 years into what through conventional wisdom would be defined as a successful journey, and they're unhappy. And they're unhappy because they never took the time to define for themselves what they ultimately want to do. And they get swept up in the stream of opportunism, a promotion, an offer from a hot company, without taking the time to understand what it is that they want to accomplish. And again, thinking about what they're best at and what they're most passionate about. And when you're just starting out on your career, as some of the folks on today's call are, it's okay not to know. And in those situations, I would encourage you to try different things. Try as diverse a slate of things as you possibly can to learn more about yourself and what you're good at and what you're passionate about, what resonates most. And to those of you who are fortunate enough to have a crisp definition of what it is you ultimately want to do, start to manifest it. And I don't mean in some predeterministic, fatalistic, new age way. I mean incorporate it into every part of your search. Brad mentioned LinkedIn earlier. Make sure it's stated as your objective on LinkedIn. Make sure your network understands what it is that you ultimately want to accomplish. Make sure they know what kind of job you're looking for, what kind of company you want to work at, what kind of role you'd like. And then lastly, I would tell you, if you're not getting to yes as quickly as you'd like, don't give up. Don't give up. Don't ever underestimate the power of your will to make things happen. And when you have that conviction, when you have that clarity in terms of what it is you ultimately want to accomplish, you are going to make it happen, both explicitly and implicitly. So I guess that would be the advice.
Wow, that was incredible. And I love the intersection between skills, passion, and as you just pointed out, persistence. And one of the things that you and I know is many of the leading companies that we've had the chance to be a part of or we sit next to in the Silicon Valley have a program called Rotational Development Program. And they bring individuals in who may have declared a major in undergrad, but then they give them a chance to work 3 months in marketing, 3 months in sales, 3 months in customer success, 3 months in product design and engineering. And after a 2-year program of rotating through all the different parts of the company, you have a newfound appreciation for where you really do have passion, and the company has good insight into where your skills match. And many times it's different than what you declared in undergrad. So this notion of trying lots of things is a wonderful approach. And with that, Jeff, I'd like to introduce Dr. Langton, who has been taking questions from the audience. And she's going to send you and me questions. Hopefully they're directed at you, but if they come my way, I'll be happy to offer an opportunity to answer as well.
Thanks, Brad. The first question is actually for both of you, and it reads, what is the best advice you would give to someone who wants to advance their career but is struggling to gain basic experience because they lack qualifications?
Yeah.
You know, this lacking of qualification it's such a vicious cycle, right? And we've all faced it. We want to get a job, and the employer, the hiring manager says, you haven't done it before. It's like, no, I haven't done it before. That's why I want to do it now. So a few different things come to mind. I think the most important thing is, to the extent you're being told you lack certain qualifications, it's okay to pursue a role that may not be the perfect fit, but by way of example, if it's still within the organization that is what you believe to be the right organization from you, just by getting your foot in the door and starting maybe at something that's more entry level than you wanted, or starting with something that may be adjacent to that job that you had dreamt of, just by getting your foot in the door, you can begin to demonstrate to people what you're all about. The hard work, the resiliency, your learning curve. And by virtue of being in the role, you're going to open up doors for yourself. You're going to create opportunities for yourself. The flip side to that, it comes back to what we talked about at the onset, which is the importance of perseverance and resilience and not giving up. If you know you're capable of doing the job, just because someone tells you you can't, doesn't mean you need to give up. And if you know it, if you know that's what you want to do and you feel it with every fiber of your being, keep going, keep going.
And Jeff, I'm not going to add anything different. I'm going to echo that because I have the same philosophy, and it came from my dad when I was graduating from Marshall. And he said, choose the company over the job. Seek a company that will surround you with people smarter than you, test you and stretch you in different ways, and then don't care what job they give you up front. In fact, volunteer for the job nobody else wants, because that will make you the person that will go in and take on a problem that nobody else wanted, and you'll become known as the person that people can go to when they need you, and eventually you'll be rewarded. And then the second is look for opportunities to develop your skills in different ways. Volunteer for projects that will get you closer to the thing you think you want to do. Do an apprenticeship, as Jeff talked about. Take a coding boot camp at nighttime. You can do this from your home. Anything you need to do to try to show that you continuously want to build that skill and capability. But most importantly, get on stage, get in the company you want, and then demonstrate through action that you can do the job. And that will change the mindset.
All right, the next question is to Jeff. How has the pandemic changed the employers and employees using LinkedIn services? Are there more or fewer participants, and have the types of jobs changed? That is, are there more offerings for professional level positions?
I don't know that I can draw a straight line in terms of causality, but engagement on LinkedIn is at all-time highs today. It's continued to be kind of up and to the right for some time now. But we do find, and we found this in 2008, 2009, that same time period during that economic crisis, that in times of uncertainty, we will see people turning to a platform like LinkedIn and turning towards their network to increasingly connect and look for opportunities and look for help and look for mentorship and advice. Another dynamic that I think most definitely is being driven by the current landscape is the increasing demand for learning. And so we're seeing our learning platform and specific courses that will help people find opportunities and develop the skills that are most in demand. We're seeing very significant growth on that front. And in terms of the roles, I think for this last month, it's interesting. They're not all, some of the most in-demand jobs, some of the fastest growing jobs would not be traditional white collar roles. There is that, but the fastest growing jobs in the last month, relatively speaking, physical security, delivery specialists, retail specialists, and fundraising. And then if we looked at the most in-demand jobs, period, not relatively speaking, but in absolute terms, it's salespeople, registered nurses is pretty high on that list. Retail and distribution specialists, delivery specialists, who I think are in enormous demand right now, given how quickly the retail and delivery landscape is evolving, and drivers.
Wow.
Okay, this question is for both of you. What are some initiatives and processes you use to foster innovation in your company?
Go ahead, Brad.
Great, happy to do that. Well, let me start by saying, first of all, at our company at Intuit, we strive to be a 38-year-old startup, and innovation is everyone's job. So we train all 10,000 employees on design thinking. We call it customer-driven innovation and design for delight, but it's the exact same curriculum we have at Marshall University, at the iCenter with Ben Ng, Olin York, and others. And this is what we're trying to embed into the curriculum. It's the Silicon Valley techniques, the best practices that have been learned from others and have been practiced at Intuit for 3 decades. So everyone gets trained on that. The second thing we then do is we give every employee 10% of unstructured time. So while they have a day job and they have regular milestones to deliver, they get 10% time to work on any idea that they think will make them or their fellow employees more productive, or will have a big impact on the customer outcome in terms of creating customer delight. And then the third thing we do is, because design for delight or design thinking is about experimentation, we subject every idea to an in-market experiment. We do not allow PowerPoint, politics, or persuasion. It's not how many stripes you have on the arm or how big your title is on your business card. My idea gets treated as a hypothesis, just like someone who may be in the contact center. And And what they do is they run rapid experiments to try to determine whether or not that idea has merit. And if it does, we have a venture capital fund. It's called the CEO Fund, and we fund the idea for 90 days. What that has created, by the way, is 1,800 experiments live inside of Intuit as we speak, and over $400 million of revenue generated from products that never came from a CEO staff meeting. They were determined by those closest to the customer, solving the most important problems and proving it with experiments. So that's how we cultivate an environment. We democratize innovation.
Not much to add to that. I'll keep it very brief. That was a fantastic answer. At the highest level, I think there's three ingredients that go into creating an innovative environment within an organization. The first is talent and making sure you have rule breakers. You can't have all rule breakers, otherwise it's going to be anarchy. But if you have no rule breakers, you're not going to get that breakthrough. You're not going to get the innovation. You're not going to get people who are questioning conventional wisdom and looking to do things differently. So you need to have people who are willing, and not only willing, but want to do things differently. And it's a very, very specific kind of individual. So that would be the first, having the right kind of talent. The second is the culture, and it's a culture, and Brad just touched on this, a culture that fosters innovation, that allows for people to fail, and at times celebrates the fact that people took a chance, as opposed to condemning anything less than perfect success, because that's going to stifle innovation. It's going to stifle risk-taking, and you want that spirit of entrepreneurship to continue to permeate throughout an organization, regardless of how successful it's been, and regardless of how large it's been. And then lastly, Brad touched on this in terms of the experimentation framework, couldn't agree more. It's about the infrastructure. And oftentimes this is the one pillar that gets overlooked. People say I hired the right innovative talent, go do your thing. Or we're constantly celebrating innovations. We've got the right culture. If you don't have the right physical infrastructure to encourage innovation, to invest in innovation, to allow for innovation to take place, not only is it not going to happen, but you're going to stifle those very same people who you're trying to liberate. They're going to become demoralized, and then your organization is not going to be innovative at all. Brad mentioned experimentation framework. I would talk about ensuring that organizations are investing in the pace with which they can launch new products. And all of our companies, certainly tech companies, accrue tech debt over time. They make a series of decisions during hyper growth where they're not necessarily investing in their physical infrastructure. They're just pumping new product out to keep up with the competition because they become so energized by innovation. And sometimes that foundational layer of infrastructure becomes most paramount in making sure that innovation can thrive.
Wow, excellent.
Okay. The next question is again to both of you. Given the impact of COVID-19 on the nature of work, what leadership skills do you envision to be the most critical going forward?
Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. In every crisis, there are new lessons learned. And Jeff and I are a part of the Business Council, which is the top 150 S&P 500 CEOs and chairs that get together. And we typically meet 3 times a year. But since March, we've met 20 times. And it's because every one of us was facing the same reality. This didn't come with instructions. No one knew what to expect, how to navigate through this coalescence of all those things that I went through in my opening comments. And so everyone was humble and seeking to learn from each other. But there were 3 things that have emerged from this that I've captured that are now a part of how I'm thinking about leadership going forward. The first is empathize. Empathize with the situation, empathize with your customers, do anything you can to help your customers continue to remain solvent and viable. Empathize with your employees and their families, and recognize that it's hard to homeschool kids while you're also trying to do a job. And then empathize with yourself and recognize you need to have boundaries, and you need to know when you can turn things on and off as you're working from home. The second is edit, and it really is exactly what Jeff talked about, fewer things done better. And in this case, we really are challenging ourselves to take everything off the plate that isn't must do and only focus on the critical few things that are absolutely necessary to help the company compete and win and come out of this stronger. And then the third is adapt. And I've been trying to talk to companies that are in business right now And I've also been trying to talk to leadership teams and say, do not think about reopen and return to work. Think about reimagine and reinvent. One of the things we're asking our employees to do is keep a running list of everything that's working better than they would have thought before we went to shelter in place. And when we come out of this, we're going to make that the new way of doing business. And we're discovering we can be more productive in more ways than we ever thought, but we had to do things differently. So those are the three things that I would say leadership should embrace coming out: empathize, edit, and adapt.
I think Brad and I are both big fans of rule of three. So I'll do three as well. And I couldn't agree more with what Brad just said. But I would add to that, one aspect is to lead from first principles. And whether it's your codified values or in addition to those values, first principles that are more situational. When the pandemic first started to become a crisis, that was one of the very first exercises we did as a leadership team. What are the first principles we're going to be using to make decisions? By way of example, ensuring that the health and safety of our employees. That was number one. And some of these first principles at times will sound obvious. I can't emphasize enough how critical they are to clearly define and repeat and make sure everyone in the organization understands, so you can not only leverage those first principles to make better decisions and more consistent decisions, but your organization understands where the decisions are coming from. Because during crisis, during emergencies, things are going to start moving very, very quickly. And that's when those first principles can be most valuable. So that would be one. Second, and Brad alluded to this already, embrace change. I think far too often leaders sometimes try to hold on to the way things once were. And that can be very, very challenging and create a lot of friction. To the extent leaders during times like this can not only embrace change, but see this as an opportunity to improve things, to let go of legacy ways of doing things, and to see new opportunities that are being created. The way in which we now work remotely would be a shining example of that. So embrace change. I think the third is to take care of yourself. And I'm not sure this gets talked about enough, but Brad did a wonderful job of encapsulating the pressures that are being put on today's leaders at both the onset of today's call and just now again. The strains, the pressures, the stress, day to day, if not hour to hour. This is largely unprecedented. And it is absolutely critical that people take care of themselves, that leaders take care of themselves. I think there's a natural tendency for leaders, the best of leaders, to want to take care of everybody else. But if those individuals are not taking care of themselves, they're not going to be able to show up for others. And so what do I mean by taking care of yourself? Mental health, physical health, rest, support systems, all of those things that far too often are overlooked when it comes to leadership.
Wow, excellent.
Okay, we have time for one quick question, and that is by a student, and it's to both of you. Who do you admire?
Yeah.
One example would be the guy that has been moderating this call. And so he's going to get all embarrassed, given that one of the qualities I admire most in him is his humility. But Brad and I had the distinct honor and privilege of working with a Silicon Valley legend, a guy named Bill Campbell. And may he rest in peace, an extraordinary human being on so many different levels and in so many different ways. And I think we both learned immeasurably from him, and he was a mentor to both of us. Bill had seen a few things in his day. He was on the board of Apple. He was Steve Jobs, arguably his closest confidant. He also attended every executive staff meeting of Google from the earliest days. And the founders of Google and the CEO of Google cite a lot of Google's success and attribute that to Bill. So he had seen a lot. He had seen extraordinary companies create extraordinary value led by extraordinary people. And he would oftentimes say, Brad was the best CEO he had ever met. And I agree. I think Brad has a combination of skills and talents you just don't see. This extraordinary intelligence, as I mentioned earlier, his ability to make the complex simple, his kindness, his heart, the way he shows up for other people. I could go on, but Brad is someone I admire greatly. And I'm not just saying that because we're here today and the school's named after him. I would tell you the exact same thing if we were in a totally different setting.
Jeff, you humble me. You're a tremendous friend, and you and I both learned a ton from Bill, and I have learned more from you than I could ever give in return. But I'll give you a name in addition to those names because those are sincere names, and I learned from so many. And Jeff and I have been blessed to have those kinds of people in our lives, from our parents to Bill Campbell to each other to others. But for me, it's also Mr. Rogers. I know when we all think of Mr. Rogers, we think of someone who had hand puppets and had sing-alongs and had this children's show, and those are all true. But if you actually deconstruct Mr. Rogers and apply it to the leadership principles that are best in class, and I wrote a LinkedIn article about this if you want to go look at it, there are three things that great leaders do. They lead with a clear and bold vision. And he had a clear and bold vision. He wanted to improve the mental and the physical well-being of children by embracing the most leading edge technology of his time, which was television in the living room. And he did that. And by the way, he was bold. He didn't just do sing-alongs. For example, there was a time in the late 1960s where racial tension was at an all-time high. And they were trying to segregate swimming pools at hotels. And they were trying to force kids that were African-American and Black out of the pools when the white kids were swimming. That evening, Mr. Rogers had a segment where he took a wading pool and he was cooling his feet. And Officer Clemens, who was a Black actor on the show, came by. And he asked Officer Clemens if he would like to rest his feet in the pool and cool his feet with him. That was intentional. Mr. Rogers took on the most challenging issues with most leading edge technology. The second thing he built a high performance culture through diversity and inclusion. That example being one that if you looked at all the actors on his show, they represented gender, race, sexual orientation, and each of the puppets represented a different ethos or a portion of his personality. And then last but not least, he delivered winning results. He had the winningest show for 33 years. He was the #1 rated children's show. He won 4 Emmys. He received a Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's in the Hall of Fame, but most importantly, Jeff and I aspire to this definition of leadership. Maya Angelou, the great poet, said, "People will not remember what you said. They will not remember what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel." All you have to do is say Mr. Rogers and hum a few bars, and you'll remember how great a leader he was. I think the world needs more Mr. Rogers right now.
Hear, hear.
All right. Thank you, Jeff and Brad, for joining us today. That's all the time we have for questions. I'll now hand it back over to you, Brad, to close the event.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Langton, for facilitating those questions. I'm sure you have many, many more, and we apologize we couldn't get to them all. And before I close, I always love to leave us with an action item. Jeff is such an amazing teacher. He's such an inspiring role model. And Jeff, one of the things I would like to ask you to do on this notion of giving people a chance to participate and to support others with compassion, you have developed this concept at LinkedIn called +1. Do you mind explaining what +1 is, and then perhaps telling this audience how they can participate and be a part of +1?
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things we've been able to study on LinkedIn is how the platform can be leveraged to help people find jobs more effectively. And if we did a poll right now, and I could see all your hands or all your votes, and I asked everyone in today's audience, has there ever been a time in which you were able to leverage someone that you knew, either professionally or personally, to help open a door for you? Typically, we see every hand in the audience go up. That was certainly the case for me. I know it was the case for Brad. And the power of networks can change everything with regard to a career. And so we dug into that a bit more. We wanted to better understand empirically the data behind that. And it turns out when you apply for a job on LinkedIn and you ask for a referral from your network, you're 9 times more likely to get the job. 9 times. So we were celebrating that because it's what we do. And our head of social impact, her name is Meg Garlinghouse, an amazing individual, said, that's great for the people that have the social capital. But what about all those incredible people that don't have the relationships and the networks, but have the aptitude and the skills? And so she was spot on, as always. And we wanted to better understand that dynamic. So who has the network and who doesn't have the powerful network? And the same data scientist did some research, and it turns out that unsurprisingly, where you grow up, where you go to school, and where you work heavily influence the strength of your network. More specifically, those that grow up in high income neighborhoods are 3 times more likely to have a strong network. Those that attend a top university are 2 times more likely to have a strong network. And those that work at a top organization or company are 2 times then again more likely to have a strong network. If you benefit from all 3 of those advantages, you are 12 times more likely to have the kind of network that creates the 9x advantage when looking for a job. This creates a very virtuous cycle for those of us that benefit from those advantages, and it creates a horribly vicious cycle for those that don't enjoy the relationships and the people that can open the doors. But these are individuals that have what it takes. They're exactly the kind of talent that organizations like Brad's and my own are looking for. So what can we do to turn these very vicious cycles into virtuous ones? We can take the +1 pledge. We can agree that the next time we're going to help someone that we grew up with, that we went to school with, that we worked with, someone like us that we naturally gravitate towards, we're also going to help someone in addition to that beyond our network who we don't know. And it can be through offering advice, answering a question, accepting an invitation, opening a door, making a recommendation. There are so many different ways individuals can share their time, their wisdom, their relationships and networks that can absolutely change someone's life. And it doesn't require countless hours of effort and energy. Sometimes it can happen just like that. So we did that at LinkedIn. Our head of social impact kind of presented this concept to us. It was extremely well received. We had 9,000 employees of the company take the +1 pledge. And the stories, these endless stories we started to hear about the difference that the +1 pledge made in terms of creating opportunities for others, just were so incredibly inspiring. So I guess if we could leave you with one action item, it would be to take the +1 pledge to help someone beyond your network, open a door for them, and help change their journey.
Jeff, I love that. And I do hope everyone in the audience will take the +1 pledge. You know, as they say in the song Humble and Kind by Tim McGraw, when you get to where you're going, don't forget to stop and turn back around and help the next one in line. And that's our opportunity. And you are my +1 pledge, West Virginia. You have been, will continue to be. And anytime I get an email or a phone call, I do my very best to connect you with what you're looking for or try to help you think through something. And Jeff, you've been a part of that today with me, and I can't thank you enough on behalf of Marshall University, President Gilbert, Dean Avi, Dr. Langton, and everyone in the audience. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your compassion. And most importantly, thank you for your example that you set for the rest of us. I really do thank you for your time today, Jeff.
Thank you, Brad. Very much appreciated. And it was an absolute privilege. Thank you for having me.
Privilege. All right. Take care, Herd Nation. Goodbye, West Virginia. And for everyone who dialed in, we'll see you at the next Distinguished Speaker Series. Have a great day and a safe and healthy holiday season.